Hey guys, it's Heather. This is my first video that I'm going to be posting to the group. I did some videos years ago before I knew much about Benzo at all, and I put them on YouTube, but since I took them down because of a professional conflict. So this is me sort of, getting back out there. As far as speaking the truth, so many of you have been incredible supports for me, and just hearing other people's stories. I think hearing people's stories is so important. One, so that we can figure out if there's anything about their story that's similar to ours and it can help us. And two, just to understand how people end up this sick, how people end up this affected by the drugs. In my case, I am badly kindled and now suffering from polydruggery. So how did I get here? How did this happen? It's something that I ask myself on a daily basis because I can't believe that this has happened to me. People ask me all the time, what's your story? And it's hard to, I'm typing on my phone, crippled in bed, shaking and dizzy, and I do my best to type and tell people, but I thought a video, maybe I can put up a link. People can just go here and hear my story. It would be the better way to do it. So, I've had Lyme disease my entire life. I was bitten when I was 7 years old, was undiagnosed until my 30s. I limped through life with a myriad of symptoms, of really awful symptoms, and nobody ever believed me, and I was always trying to get help for all these different things that was wrong with me, and didn't happen until I was well into my 30s. Because I, at that point, had purchased an old house and I started renovating it. Was ripping it apart from top to bottom and naively exposing myself to chemical solvents, lead paint, asbestos, mold, and I became very, very sick. The combination of undiagnosed, untreated Lyme disease, which was suppressing my immune system and clogging up my detox pathways, and then this barrage of all these toxins, it was the perfect storm of disease. I was really, really sick. It's a miracle that I made it through that time, to be honest. But I had a husband, a very loving husband, and my mind, my cognitive ability was not affected at that point. So I was able to research and find a lot of information, and by the grace of God, get to different doctors, and eventually, the truth unraveled and I knew what was making me sick. But I didn't get out unscathed because benzodiazepine was prescribed to me during that Lyme treatment. One of my worst symptoms was severe insomnia, and originally, September 2009, Ambien was prescribed. Now, mind you, I lost my sister to drugs. I lost my little sister. She died at the age of 25 from heroin. For over a decade, I watched drugs destroy her. In addition to that, I've been a naturopath for 20 years. When I first started, my health first started failing when I was a teenager. The way that I would always heal myself and put Lyme into remission, I didn't know it was Lyme at the time, but the way I would, boost my immune system was naturally. So I was always saying no to drugs. So for me to get prescribed benzodiazepine, it took a lot, and for me, and Ambien as well. So the insomnia was pretty severe. And now I look back at that time, Klonopin came in January 2010. And I look back at that time and I can see clearly now that I was experiencing tolerance withdrawal symptoms pretty quickly. When you have Lyme and mold and heavy metal poisoning, it's hard to know what's what, but there are some symptoms that are unique to benzodiazepine withdrawal, to tolerance withdrawal, interdose withdrawal, also to these other drugs. And now I can look back and go, yeah, I can see how so much of this was benzo. From random eye twitching to crippling muscle pain, pretty sure that benzodiazepine was the culprit for a long time. So fast forward, February 2012, I've now been on Klonopin for 2 years, completely oblivious to the dangers of benzodiazepine. Worked my way up to 4 milligrams because of tolerance, living in the house that was making me sick, trying to sleep. And I move out of the house and separate from my husband. I'm on my own, and extremely stressed out with the move, and so my Klonopin prescription runs out. And I think, oh, I probably won't be able to sleep. That's going to suck. Little did I know, that I was going to go into severe acute withdrawal, and that's what happened. Luckily, one of my doctors recognized it. She's a pain specialist that I'd been seeing for trigger point injections, which I'm pretty sure were from benzo tolerance withdrawal. So she starts me on a protocol to taper me off of Klonopin. So this is February 2012. And she first takes me off of Ambien and she puts me on a different sleep medication. And she tells me to take little bites of the Klonopin during the day because I'm, suffering interdose withdrawal every day. Tells me it'll take about a year. So I'm very aggressive, type A, have a high threshold for suffering. I rocked that taper, rocked it. And I was ready to come off 9 months later. However, her appointments were $600 and I wasn't able to afford to keep seeing her. And I just figured I knew what I had to do, just taking lower doses along the way. So I was kind of on my own. And little did I know that the sleep medication that she had put me on, it's a drug called Reinstatement, also a benzodiazepine. I don't know why she did that. She probably planned to take me off of it. But at the time I was just so traumatized, and of course also in withdrawal and everything that you experience psychologically and emotionally from that. I wasn't in touch with her about it, but I had the refills, so I kept taking it. So I come off Klonopin September 2012. And it was a rough couple of weeks. I was pretty sick. Watched my sister go through withdrawal many times, so I figured, it'd be something like that. And then I started getting better. I do the things that I always do. Cleaned up my diet significantly. Was taking antifungals because candida is a big part of this for me. And I know how sick that makes me. Was having colonics on a regular basis. So like rebuilding my gut kind of got me out of that hole. So fast forward spring 2013, I meet a new friend of mine. She's an MD. She also has Lyme disease, and she asked me what I'm doing for sleep. Insomnia is very common with Lyme. And I told her about Reinstatement, and she said, "You're on a benzo?" And I almost crashed my car. It was pretty devastating for me. So that's when I discovered the Ashton manual and realized I was not yet out of the woods. And that's when I began my second taper. Found a doctor who would prescribe Valium, and he wanted me on 40 milligrams of Valium. I was on 20 milligrams of Reinstatement, and I was like, this is ridiculous. So I started my taper at 20 milligrams of Valium, and it took me a year and a half. I was working during that time, quite symptomatic, but functional. There was a sweet spot in there, above 10 milligrams, where I was able to work, do yoga, spin, run, have relationships, be active, be vibrant, be creative. Nobody would have known. I was suffering symptoms, all sorts of hypersensitivities to sound and smell and light, a lot of anxiety. And I just toughed through it. And then I started getting like really bad interstitial cystitis under 10 milligrams. Of course, problems with sleeping, rarely sleeping. Plus I have thyroid disease, so the thyroid was an issue. Balancing the thyroid. I didn't know at that time how benzodiazepine and thyroid were so directly related. A lot of times I would go hyperthyroid and I have to reduce my medication because that was affecting my sleep. I mean, again, uneducated though, really. I knew very little. I was like, I read the Ashton manual and again figured I just got to get off this stuff. I didn't know how complex it was and how interconnected with the endocrine system and the central nervous system, the cardiac system, like all of it, especially as a woman too. I think women really get screwed up hormonally by this drug. So anyway, I get under 5 milligrams and the wheels really start coming off. Now I'm having extreme hunger and sugar cravings, again, trying to combat the candida overgrowth with high-dose probiotics and a completely sugar, carb-free diet. And that did help somewhat. I was never sleeping, though. Pretty much under 5 milligrams, I was sleeping like every fourth night. It was rough. And I would do intramuscular B12 injections and caffeine that would get me through the day. And I get down to 1 milligram. This is August 2014. And I decide it's time to come off. Again, uneducated. I wasn't on Benzo buddies. I wasn't a member of any of these groups. I didn't even know they existed. Having that experience with my sister's addiction and watching her go through heroin withdrawal so many times, I really just thought it was going to be something like that. And having been so severely sick for so many years and survived so many symptoms, I thought that, I could get through it. So I took about 2 months off of work. I told my boss, I kind of work for myself, but I told him I needed some time off, and I stocked my fridge. And I put one post up on Benzo Buddies. This is my first ever post. And I just said, I'm jumping off 1 milligram. And 2 people responded, probably admins. And one of them said, kind of, hinting to the fact that I was a little high to jump off 1 milligram of Valium. But at that time, again, not knowing anything and being so incredibly stubborn and set in my ways, I just, ripped it off. So I stopped taking Valium. It was the first week of September 2014, and I entered a horrific acute withdrawal. Really, truly, just indescribable. Hallucinating, head to toe symptoms. If I could go back and sort of identify those symptoms, there's probably 150 symptoms that I was suffering from at one time. I was very, very sick. But I just kept thinking the longer you go, the farther away from that last dose, the more, you're going to heal, right? Isn't that the way withdrawal works? So there's a lot more to my story. My goodness. It's a pretty important piece. About a week after I came off, I had this flood of emotions come into my body. I'm a very sensitive person. I'm an empath. I feel for every creature, every person, animals, every being. And I went through a phase when I was on high dose of Klonopin, and then also tapering off, where I didn't feel much. I didn't realize it at the time. I remember thinking, like, this is great. I'm not hurting as much. I wasn't hurting over the death of my sister. I was able to separate from my husband very easily. I never shed a tear over the separation. Had to get rid of 2 of my animals, buried one of my dogs, and I did it all pretty unscathed, When a week after I came off of Valium, it was like every emotion just came rushing back in like an avalanche. And it was like I woke up into a nightmare. I was crying, hysterically sobbing all day long, like guttural, like pain, emotional grieving and mourning so bad that it could kill you type pain. Asking myself, where's my husband? Where's my house? Where are my animals? It was just like, it was truly like I was going back to 2010 before it was prescribed. It was unbelievable. I reached out to my ex. We were still married at the time, but separated. And I wrote him an amends letter, apologizing for so many things and the way that I behaved and treated him. I mean, it was horrific regret. And he never responded to me. He just, right at the time I went off, I think it was just like a coincidence, an awful coincidence. He just cut me off and he never responded. So that just increased, you can imagine, like all my pain and anxiety and depression, all of it. It was pretty awful. A friend of mine sees me about a month later after my last dose of Valium, and she says, you really need to get help. You're very, very sick. And I was confused. So I contacted a friend of mine who runs a Lyme organization, and she referred me to this doctor out in Long Island. I live in New Jersey, right outside New York City. She said she had seen him at a Lyme symposium. He was a holistic psychiatrist, and that he helped people come off of these medications. I thought, bingo, what's better than that, right? A doctor that understands this hideous drug and also knows Lyme disease and treats people holistically. I was like, this is perfect. It felt like a God thing. So I get an appointment with him. I go out to him October 2014. and he tells me I'm very sick. He runs a bunch of tests, and at this point I have active mononucleosis and pretty severe anemia, and I have urinary tract infection. Hashimoto's was back, and the thyroid condition that I had. I mean, I was a hot mess pretty much. And he says to me, you need to go back on benzodiazepine. It's like, hell no. I'd rather die than go back on benzodiazepine. I just tapered off of it for 2.5 years. But in that state of mind that I was in, literally hallucinating while I'm in his office, I can't even make eye contact. I'm like hiding under my baseball hat. Like I could barely even write. I was so incredibly sick, and I'm desperate and I'm vulnerable and I don't have anybody there with me. So I trusted him. It's not that I'm naive. I know that doctors can mislead you, but I was just so incredibly vulnerable. I had never been in that place. I know Lyme disease. I know mold sickness. I know heavy metals. I know autoimmune diseases. I could talk to you about 100 different diseases and help you navigate through them. I had never experienced psych drug sickness. That was a new one for me. I needed help, right? So he says, I'm going to put you on phenobarbital. I know nothing about this drug. He convinces me that it's going to help me, it's going to stabilize me, and then it will be easier to come off of than benzo. Where the plot thickens and takes an insidious turn is that a month before I came off of Valium, when the insomnia was pretty wicked, I reached out to my Lyme doctor and I told him I needed something to help me sleep to come off of this drug. And he prescribed low-dose Elavil. I had said no to low-dose Elavil repeatedly through the whole Lyme journey, but this time I was on my knees and desperate to come off of benzo successfully, so reluctantly I took the low-dose Elavil, 30 milligrams of that. So I was on that 2 months by the time I got out to this doctor. His name's Dr. Gurevich. Red light warning. And when I came off of benzodiazepine, I had such severe muscle pain that I started taking Flexeril, cyclobenzaprine. I had it in my cabinet. I'd been taking it on and off without ever having a problem since 2010. It's a pretty mild drug. It just kind of took the edge off the pain a little bit. I never felt it psychologically. It felt safe to me. What the hell do I know? So I was taking it for about 3 weeks when I got out to Dr. Gurevich. So on top of reinstating me on phenobarbital, of course, not telling me anything about kindling, about how only time can heal benzo withdrawal, he didn't educate me at all. So not only did he reinstate me, he tells me I have to stay on Elavil and cyclobenzaprine. I'd been on cyclobenzaprine 3 weeks. That was a huge mistake that he made. He should have taken me off of it right away before another problem was created. But he tells me that now I'm addicted to these two. And I'm like, again, in this vulnerable state, I'm not thinking clearly, and I trusted him. So I started to stabilize. It took me a couple months to stabilize. And in December, I started to taper off the phenobarbital. And per Dr. Gurevich's instructions, I was to taper off the phenobarbital first and then taper off the other two. Here I go. Tapering very aggressively. Now I'm back to work because I've completely run out of money. I have no choice. I was way more functional, but still, still uneducated, and had no business juggling everything that I was juggling, while I was tapering. So I start tapering off of phenobarbital, and one of the symptoms that I was having was severe constipation. I still have it. And interstitial cystitis. The urinary tract infections had just escalated to this hideous disease called interstitial cystitis, which is nerve pain in your bladder and in your urethra. It's pretty wicked. I've talked to some other sufferers in the community who have it. So I thought that the cyclobenzaprine and the amitriptyline were contributing to these symptoms. So I felt, I think a lot of us do this. I got cocky and I started tapering all 3 drugs at once, which was a massive mistake. But I didn't know that at the time. So I started tapering the pheno. I got from 30 milligrams of phenobarbital 2 times a day to 6.5 milligrams of phenobarbital 2 times a day. And I got down from 10 milligrams of cyclobenzaprine to 1.8 milligrams of cyclobenzaprine, and from 30 milligrams of amitriptyline to 20. And the wheels came off. of course. I got very, very sick, didn't know what was wrong, and started having those acute withdrawal symptoms, anxiety and agoraphobia and panic and fear and all these awful like hunger symptoms, GI symptoms. And I kind of recognized it at that point. I'm like, shit, this is acute withdrawal. So I went back to Dr. Gurevich, and he didn't know what to do. He's like, well, how do you want me to help you? And he tells me to go way back up on my doses. He looks at, the last time he had seen me was in January. I was at 23.5 milligrams of phenobarbital. So he tells me to go back up to that. And I'm like crying hysterically, like, are you kidding me? Really? That's all you got for me? I didn't know much about how long it takes to stabilize. If I knew then what I know now, I would have probably really held out, maybe around 10 milligrams of phenobarbital. I don't know, 2.5 milligrams of cyclobenzaprine, something like that. And I would have just like toughed it out and waited for my body to stabilize. But again, uneducated. So then Dr. Gurevich kicks me out of his practice because I looked up cyclobenzaprine and I found out that it was actually a tricyclic antidepressant. He didn't know anything about it, and yet he tells me to stay on this drug. He said it was a drug he was unfamiliar with. He had no experience with it, yet he tells me to stay on it. And amitriptyline is a tricyclic antidepressant. So I ended up on 2 conflicting medications that when you Google them, there's like a red alert warning that they're not supposed to be combined. And I sent him that email. I sent him the link. I said, check this out. This is pretty unsafe to have somebody on these 2 drugs. And of course, he kicked me out of his practice because he felt threatened. I didn't mean to threaten him. I was truly trying to just get help and help him to learn more to help me, but it blew up in my face. So here I am. I'm in acute withdrawal on 3 drugs because the other thing that happened, if you can even fathom this, I was taking these compounded liquid suspension medications, and they expired on me. The pharmacist kind of messed up, and I was spiraling into acute withdrawal on 3 medications at once. So I stabilized at higher doses. It took me a long time to stabilize. I eventually found a new doctor. It was extremely stressful. I was alone, out of my mind, and calling doctor after doctor on the East Coast. I probably called 20 different addiction medicine doctors. I called my Lyme doctor back. Nobody could help me. They would say to me, you'd be better off if you were on a Benzo, because I don't have any experience with phenobarbital. It's an antiquated medication. Really? I mean, this guy puts me on something that nobody else can help me with, and then he kicks me out of his practice. I called inpatient facilities. Of course, they just said you can't rapid taper pheno. I spoke to other doctors, told them about the mix of medications I was on. This one doctor said to me, something else is wrong with you, Heather. You must have Lyme disease or something else is going on. Otherwise, you could get off these medications. I mean, it was a shit show. So I find this doctor, Dr. Charles Gant in DC. He has experience with phenobarbital. It was the first doctor I found. I go to DC, and he tells me that he thinks I do have Lyme, that it came out of remission when I came off of benzodiazepine. Holy hell. Hashimoto's is back raging still. I had a pretty nasty stomach infection. It's called H.Pylori. Probably had it since I came off, and it went undetected. So I had parasites at this point, like really like a substantial, tremendous parasitic infection. So I'm on herbs to treat all this stuff. I'm treating Lyme, I'm treating Candida, I'm trying to stabilize, and I slowly start to taper off the Flexeril, the cyclobenzaprine. Dr. Gant tells me that I need to come off the 2 ADs first, just based on my neurochemistry. So here I am. I'm down to 1 milligram right now of cyclobenzaprine. I am holding at 23.5 milligrams of phenobarbital. I'm holding at 30 milligrams of Elavil, amitriptyline. And I am so badly kindled. There are other things that happen. The phenobarbital spilled in July when I went down to DC, and his office wasn't able to get the prescription out in time, and it threw me into withdrawal. It's a really serious situation, what's happening to us. Dr. Gant also prescribed this stuff called IVIG, which is immune therapy. And I had a nurse come and give me this immune therapy back in the summer, and it put me in the hospital because I'm so incredibly sensitive now to everything. And I don't have anyone. It's pretty intense. So that's my story. I wish I had never seen Dr. Gurovich a year ago. I wish that I had just stopped taking everything. I'd probably be healed by now. It'd be a lot better than I am. I wouldn't be stuck in this polydrug web. And I'm having a really hard time coming off of Flexeril. Can you believe it? Like, I'm down to 1 milligram and I'm super, super sick this week. I lost control of my taper last week. I was tapering too quickly. And then I got the bright idea to split my dose and take it 2 times a day instead of 1. I was looking at the half-life. I talked to another friend in the community, and it seemed like maybe the thing that was getting in my way was that I was taking it once a day. So I started taking it 2 times a day, and it was like the worst decision. I mean, I'm so incredibly sick the last week. So I'm now waiting to stabilize on that milligram 1 time a day. And hopefully I do, and hopefully I can get off this poison. So far the Flexeril taper, it's not as bad as the Benzodiazepine taper or withdrawal, but it's bad. It's significant. It's debilitating in its own ways. I am still continually humbled by the power of these drugs. They're like the ocean to me. You want to just swim in the waves and enjoy it, and it could literally swallow you up and kill you and take you out to sea. And that is the power of these drugs. They bring me to my knees on a daily basis. And I've learned a lot along the way. When I am well, when that happens, I will not rest until there is awareness and change for benzodiazepine. This is a horror show that this is happening to people. I mean, we were talking years of my life have just been sucked into a vortex of suffering. And this has to stop. We need awareness. Thank you for listening to my story. It's a little more longer-winded than I had planned. And I hope it helps somebody who hears it. All right, guys.